I understand he was out in California, out in Las Vegas a couple weeks ago, but he was begging, you know, and the guys gave him a little bit of money just to get rid of him. They went to Europe. They had the hallucinogens. It's kind of difficult to change everything, you know. Over these years, he's still had to fight that monster. Got sunshine on a cloudy day.
David Ruffin was a polarizing figure, and he died with a secret about Hollywood that could shake the industry as we know it.
You're good?
I know you want to leave me,
Yeah.
but I refuse to let you go.
He had all kind of extremes. Good guy, believe me, excellent guy when he wasn't in one of those extremes.
And the truth has been littered all throughout his life.
When we first started out, we made a vow that we would not change, you know, because we had heard about Frankie Lyman leaving the Teenagers and Tony Williams leaving the Platters, so we made a vow.
Back in the day, when he was just a kid growing up in rural Mississippi, life was far from easy. Imagine this. Living in a house with no running water. That's the kind of childhood David Ruffin had. Despite the odds stacked against him, he held on to a dream, a big one. He wanted to be a famous performer, like the ones he saw on the radio or maybe even on TV. But back then, for a black kid in the 1940s and 1950s, especially in the southern states tangled up in Jim Crow laws and segregation, that dream seemed about as likely as walking on the moon. But David had something special. He could sing like nobody's business, and he had this way of connecting with people, making them laugh, smile, and feel every note he sang. All he needed was a stage. Fast forward to his mid-20s, and David Ruffin was on fire. He became the heart and soul of the Temptations, a group that lit up North Philadelphia's Uptown Theater. Just imagine the scene. 2,000 fans packed into this beautiful Art Deco theater, moving in sync with the music, dressed to the nines in matching suits, and dancing like there was no tomorrow. David, standing tall at 6'2", with his trademark thick glasses and a voice that could move mountains, belted out hits like My Girl, which soared to the top of the charts in 1965. And let me tell you, that song is still making waves today, with almost 500 million streams on Spotify alone. He didn't stop there, though. Hits like Ain't Too Proud to Beg and I Know I'm Losing You cemented his status as a legend. But it wasn't just about the music. David had a way of pouring his heart and soul into every lyric, making you feel the joy and pain of love like you've never felt before. It was magnetic. People couldn't get enough of him. Even a young Daryl Hall couldn't resist the pull of David's voice, sneaking backstage to meet his idols. Offstage, David was a puzzle. Playful 1 minute, quick to anger the next. Ambitious yet haunted by his own demons, struggling with issues like substance and mental health in a time when nobody really understood them. He was a complicated soul, but one thing was for sure. When he sang, it was like magic. In the 1980s, fate had a surprise waiting for David Ruffin in Philadelphia. By then, he wasn't basking in the spotlight like before, having experienced the ups and downs of a solo career. But just when he least expected it, a golden opportunity arose. Hall and John Oates, those iconic names in music, reached out to him and Eddie Kendricks, another former Temptation, inviting them to share the stage at John F. Kennedy Stadium for Live Aid. Can you imagine the energy in that stadium? With nearly 90,000 fans welcoming back these Motown legends with roaring applause? It could have been the beginning of a comeback story fit for the movies, but sadly, fate took a tragic turn. Ruffin tragically passed away from an accidental overdose of crack. Reports indicate that he collapsed at a crack house in West Philadelphia, accompanied by his friend Donald Brown. Brown rushed him to the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, where medical staff worked tirelessly to revive him. But sadly, Ruffin was declared dead at 3:55 a.m. that morning due to an adverse reaction to Authorities revealed that Ruffin and another individual named William Nowell had split 10 vials of crack at Nowell's home just hours before his death. While the cause of death was ruled accidental, suspicions of foul play arose among Ruffin's family and friends, especially with the disappearance of a money belt containing $40,000 from his body. However, Diane Showers, Ruffin's girlfriend at the time, wasn't entirely surprised by the news. She noted that Ruffin tended to indulge in his desires when he had ample funds. The portrayal of Ruffin's death in the Temptations television miniseries sparked controversy. The series depicted documented his body being dumped in front of a hospital, where he allegedly remained unclaimed in a morgue for a week. Ruffin's estate filed a lawsuit against NBC and others involved in the series, claiming defamation. According to the plaintiffs, Ruffin was actually taken to the hospital by a limousine and was promptly identified by his driver upon arrival. Additionally, Ruffin's children stated that his body was claimed by one of them within days of his passing. Despite their efforts, Ruffin's estate lost the lawsuit, with the ruling upheld on appeal. For 30 long years, those closest to Ruffin have wrestled with the haunting what-ifs that often accompany losing someone to addiction. Back then, addiction wasn't seen as the health crisis it's recognized as today. Instead, it was often brushed off as a mere bad habit. But those who knew Ruffin, like soul singer Candy Staton, knew better. Addiction wasn't just a habit, it was a relentless struggle that many didn't understand. And amidst the media frenzy surrounding his death, there's a lingering feeling among Ruffin's loved ones that his true legacy was overshadowed by tales of his flaws and the circumstances of his passing. As Candy Staton puts it, it wasn't called a disease, it was just called a bad habit. But the truth is, addiction is far more complex than that, and it's time Ruffin's talents and contributions receive the recognition they deserve. But there was more to him than that. When it came to understanding David Ruffin, his former bandmates often felt like they were solving a mystery. Otis Williams, the lone original Temptation still with us, once reminisced about Ruffin's quirky antics. He described him as this lively, funny guy who'd break into cartwheels mid-stroll down the street. Despite spending a lot of time together, Ruffin remained tight-lipped about his past, keeping his background shrouded in mystery. In his memoir, Temptations, Williams painted a picture of Ruffin as a complex and intense individual, always grappling with something beneath the surface. Ruffin's family history was a tale of pain and secrets, as his niece Gina Ruffin Moore discovered while growing up in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Her father, Quincy Ruffin, a member of the U.S. Army Special Forces, had kept his family history under wraps for years, claiming to be an orphan. But one day, he confessed to having a sister named Rita Mae and two famous brothers, David, of Temptations fame, and Jimmy Ruffin, known for his Motown hit, What Becomes of the Broken-Hearted. The Ruffin family's were buried deep in rural Wynot. Miss David and his siblings faced hardship from a young age. Their mother passed away when David was just a baby, leaving their father, Eli Ruffin, to raise them. Eli had his own ideas for his children's future, molding them into a singing group known as the Spiritual Trying Four. Life wasn't easy for the Ruffin kids. Money was scarce, and their father's discipline was often harsh. But amidst the struggles, David and Jimmy found solace in their voices. Gina fondly recalls David's early aspirations of stardom, playing make-believe as if he were already on The Ed Sullivan Show, standing on a makeshift stage and commanding imaginary applause. In 1965, when Gina was just 8 years old, she finally met her Uncle David. His arrival was nothing short of spectacular, pulling up to their North Carolina home in a dazzling white limousine complete with white mink carpeting, accompanied by a majestic white dog. I mean, just imagine this. David Ruffin, offered a juicy barbecued steak, decides it's not for him. Instead, he hands it over to his furry companion and casually asks his hosts, "Got any baby food?" Surprised, they watch as Ruffin indulges in a jar of baby peaches, quietly revealing that he's dealing with an ulcer. However, during his time in Detroit in the early 1960s, Ruffin was rarely vulnerable. Berry Gordy Jr., the mastermind behind Motown Records, was responsible for Detroit's thriving music scene. Gordy was altering the music landscape like no one else, with artists on his roster including Smokey Robinson, Diana Ross and the Supremes, and Stevie Wonder. Ruffin got his big break when the Temptations offered him a slot in 1964, filling in for Eldridge Bryant. And let me assure you that he did not disappoint. Consider this scenario: Ruffin crashing onto the stage with the band at a Detroit lounge, hurling the microphone in the air, doing splits, and belting out songs like a man possessed. Otis Williams, a member of the Temptations, later described this exciting audition. Later that year, they scored their first major success with The Way You Do the Things You Do, written by none other than Smokey Robinson. Ruffin couldn't hold back tears of excitement when he learned the song was ascending the Billboard charts. However, it was Smokey Robinson's following creation that truly sealed Ruffin's legend. Inspired by Ruffin's vocals, Robinson wrote a slow, deep song that would become a love anthem for years to come, My Girl. It not only topped the charts, but it became a timeless classic that has captivated hearts for almost 50 years. As their success grew, the Temptations hit the road hard, touring non-stop with other Motown greats along what was known as the Chitlin Circuit. This circuit provided a lifeline for black performers, performers, providing locations where they could demonstrate their abilities without experiencing the discrimination that existed elsewhere. One star on this tour was Philadelphia's Uptown Theater, located on North Broad Street. It was more than just a venue. It was a vital part of the city's black community. And amidst the music and applause, something unique happened. Black and white concertgoers came together, bonded by their love of music. Even on this circuit, the ugly specter of racism occasionally surfaced. Otis Williams, a member of the Temptations, described a disturbing episode in Kentucky where a concert devolved into mayhem. As they loaded their bus, a gang of white guys opened fire, yelling racial slurs and threats, leaving the band rattled and afraid for their safety. Despite the difficulties, the Temptations achieved unprecedented heights, including a coveted appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show. Most people would be terrified, but David Ruffin was unafraid. Cool as a cucumber, he assured his bandmates, "It ain't nothing but another television show." That was the kind of assurance that distinguished Ruffin, a man destined for greatness on whatever stage. Turbulence loomed over David Ruffin's trip ahead. His romance with fellow Motown artist Tammy Terrell was rumored to be violent, but Ruffin's family later denied these reports. Then, in 1968, he abruptly left the Temptations. By 1967, David Ruffin's behavior was causing some friction among the Temptations. He began to expect special treatment, such as riding to gigs in his own private mink-lined sedan with his then-girlfriend, Tammy Terrell, rather than traveling with the rest of the group. This, combined with his insistence on changing the group's name to David Ruffin and the Temptations, irritated his bandmates. Even Motown's choice to rebrand the Supremes as Diana Ross and the Supremes fueled Ruffin's sense of entitlement. Ruffin's increased use exacerbated the tension, resulting in missing meetings, rehearsals, and gigs. His bandmates believed he needed to be replaced. When he missed a gig in June 1968 to be with his new girlfriend Barbara Gale Martin, Dean Martin's daughter, the group had had enough. They sacked him officially on June 27, 1968, and hired Dennis Edwards as his replacement the next day. Ruffin, despite his friendship with Edwards, did not take the news well. Ruffin showed up uninvited to Edwards' inaugural gig with the Temptations and took the microphone to sing lead on Ain't Too Proud to Beg. This occurred numerous times throughout the group's tour in July, causing confusion and frustration. There's a legendary anecdote told by Dennis Edwards, but disputed by others, about Ruffin's on-stage antics, convincing the Temptations to consider rehiring him. Ruffin's failure to appear for his return engagement in Gaithersburg, Maryland, sealed his destiny. The gang decided to move on without him. Ruffin subsequently shifted his focus to legal action against Motown. In October 1968, he sued the label for breach of contract, but the issue was settled out of court, requiring Ruffin to continue working with Motown as a solo artist until his contract expired. A year later, Ruffin released the album My Whole World Ended, which was moderately successful. Sure, he could still sing out those soulful love songs like No One's Business. Just listen to the sheer intensity in his voice on tracks like I Miss You, Part 1, from 1973. While Ruffin focused on what he knew best, peers such as Marvin Gaye were delving into more serious topics like the Vietnam War and societal turmoil. Paul Barker of the Motown Museum reflected on this period, observing that while the world around Ruffin was swiftly changing, he appeared stuck in a rut, performing the same old songs without exploring new vistas. Candy Staton, who knew Ruffin well, saw his enthusiasm for life personally. He was a free spirit, occasionally careening through life like a wild child in search of adventure. But there were also darker moments when self-destructive instincts took hold. Staton recounts a tense trip in Ruffin's Chevrolet Corvette on a tour, pleading with him to slow down. "David, for goodness sake, ease off the gas," she pleaded. But Ruffin, ever the daredevil, dismissed her fears with a grin. "Relax, girl. I ain't gonna hurt you," he reassured her, putting the gas pedal to the metal with a carefree attitude. Here's a fascinating story about Candy Staton and Bobby Womack's visit to David Ruffin during one of his recording sessions in California. Ruffin was eager to finish things quickly and spend time with his friends, but the producer insisted on his presence. Let's just say tempers rose, and Ruffin and the producer disappeared for a while. When Ruffin returned, he was very upset. "What happened?" Womack inquired, probably anticipating some backstage drama. Ruffin, as casual as ever, brushed it off. "Oh, I just knocked him out cold," he explained, shaking his hand casually. Now let's take a look at Ruffin's family life. Despite his larger-than-life stage image, his 4 children, David, Cheryl, Nedra, and Kimberly, saw a different side of Dad. Cheryl vividly recalls her father teaching her to drive, taking her on horseback rides, and the joyful chaos of Christmas celebrations packed with laughter and good food. Cheryl received her first experience of the music business in the mid-1970s when her father took her on tour in support of his smash track, Walk Away from Love. While she aspired to follow in his footsteps, Ruffin ensured she grasped the less glamorous side of the game, the business grind that goes on behind the scenes. Ruffin briefly rejoined the Temptations in 1982, but his intermittent attendance at their concerts caused him to leave the group quickly. To make matters worse, he got into trouble with the law the same year, facing federal tax fraud accusations. It appeared that his career had hit rock bottom, but just when it looked like the end, fortune intervened. Hall and Oates, inspired by the Temptations' ageless music, persuaded Ruffin and Eddie Kendricks to join them for a medley of oldies at a 1985 benefit concert. And let me tell you, that was a musical dream come true. Hall himself admitted, "They were my gods, man. The way they sang moved me, like probably nobody ever has." Back when John Oates was 19, he and Daryl Hall snagged front row seats at the Apollo Theater, ready to see the Temptations perform. They had no idea how that night would permanently alter their lives. They happened to run across the renowned David Ruffin backstage, which left Oates starstruck. Singing alongside his idols on stage became a watershed moment for Oates, who felt as if he was watching the event from a bizarre perspective. "It was like an out-of-body experience," he recalls. Their cosmic connection continued at Live Aid, and Oates even served as producer for One More for the Lonely Hearts Club, a song Ruffin and Kendricks recorded for an album in 1987. Ruffin was excited at the potential of fresh prospects on the horizon, but he was also falling deeper into the grip of addiction. Hall watched Ruffin's descent, noting that he was surrounded by a mob that only fueled his destructive tendencies. The music industry, as it turned out, was not exactly a beacon of empathy for celebrities struggling with addiction. Oates simply stated that expecting the firm to have a social conscience at the time was unrealistic. The crack epidemic of the 1980s struck hard, particularly in black communities, when official solutions frequently oriented toward punishment rather than rehabilitation. Ruffin found himself on the wrong side of the law in the late 1980s, facing possession charges and going to treatment as a result. By 1989, Ruffin had moved to Philadelphia with his girlfriend, Diane Showers, and had become friends with Linster Butch Merle, the owner of a local limousine firm. But behind the scenes, Ruffin's addiction was out of control. Merle recounts seeing him disappear inside buildings to get narcotics, portraying a bleak image of a man tormented by his afflictions. Despite the darkness, there were glimmers of hope. In 1991, Ruffin contacted his brother Quincy, suggesting a journey back to Mississippi for a peaceful lakeside stroll, a return to simpler times. Sadly, fate had different plans. On May 31st that year, dressed casually, Ruffin set out on a fateful trip that would end in tragedy. On June 1st, just before 3 a.m., Donald Brown arrived at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania's emergency room door with his passenger, David Ruffin. The urgency in his voice as he told hospital staff that Ruffin had overdosed was evident. Unfortunately, despite efforts to save him, the singer died only an hour later. Sensationalized news coverage overshadowed the aftermath of Ruffin's death. Speculation swirled, particularly over the circumstances of his death. Rumors circulated about a possible robbery, especially since Ruffin had recently finished touring with Eddie Kendricks and another former Temptation, Dennis Edwards. One of Ruffin's managers even mentioned that he was carrying a large sum of money that night, yet he arrived at the hospital with only $53 in his pocket. Cheryl Ruffin Robinson, David Ruffin's daughter, has long suspected foul involvement in her father's death. Many issues remain unanswered concerning his final hours, leaving the family to deal with sadness exacerbated by sensationalized accounts that appeared to damage his legacy. As Cheryl puts it, these stories wrongly transferred the responsibility onto her father rather than acknowledging the harmful consequences of addiction. Despite the circumstances surrounding his death, Ruffin's funeral in Detroit projected a different picture. Thousands turned out to say goodbye, demonstrating the influence his music had on people's lives, which far outweighed any unfavorable headlines. David Ruffin's vocal prowess drew acclaim from fellow artists across the board. Martha Reeves of Martha and the Vandellas described him as incomparable, saying nobody could sing like David Ruffin. Even Marvin Gaye, a contemporary and label mate, was astounded by Ruffin's voice, remarking on how it resonated resonated with listeners, particularly women, as a symbol of masculine strength. Daryl Hall regarded Ruffin's voice as having a distinct blend of agony and glory that connected with people on a deep emotional level. Ruffin himself was humble about his singing ability, saying, "I don't know what kind of voice I have. It's just the feeling I get for the song." Another fan, Rod Stewart, clearly remembered the impact of Ruffin's music, particularly the song "I Wish It Would Rain," which he regarded as soul-stirring. Their respect for one another even evolved to a friendship, with Stewart comparing Ruffin's voice to a tremendous force similar to a foghorn on the Queen Mary. Ruffin's legacy reaches beyond his musical influence and into contemporary society. The cover art for his final album, Gentleman Ruffin, inspired the artwork for rapper Wiz Khalifa's mixtape Kush and Orange Juice, showcasing Ruffin's ongoing influence on several genres. In 2013, David Ruffin was posthumously inducted twice into Cleveland State University's Rhythm and Blues Music Hall of Fame in appreciation of his contributions to the genre. He received recognition both as a solo performer and as a member of the Temptations, cementing his lasting impact on the music industry. Ruffin was also inducted into the Mississippi Musicians Hall of Fame, solidifying his status among the musical greats. That's all for the video, folks. Thanks for watching.